Good afternoon, everyone. This is LA State, a political news show covering local and state issues affecting Cal State LA students. I'm your host, Joe Brzalera.
And I'm your co-anchor, Mallory Wilkins.
Hi, how's it going, everyone? Today's topic is a new ordinance in the city of Anaheim that recently took effect. The ordinance will prevent lobbyists from entering city government and is meant to limit the influence of the powerful resort industry lobby within the city of Anaheim. We'll be talking with the ordinance's sponsor, Dr. Jose Moreno, about what kind of change he hopes this ordinance will bring to Anaheim.
We're also going to give you some background on the political landscape of Anaheim. We're going to discuss how district elections of city council members has shifted the power balance in Anaheim, which has resulted in contentious city council meetings.
So thanks for tuning in. We'll be right back after this. You're listening to Golden Eagle Radio.
This is Bill Covino. I'm the president of Cal State LA. You're listening to Golden Eagle Radio, your voice, your radio.
And we're back. The show is LA State. The station is Golden Eagle Radio. Today we're talking about a new anti-lobbying ordinance in the city of Anaheim.
All I really know about Anaheim is that it's where Disneyland is. Can you tell me about the city?
Yeah, so Anaheim is Orange County's oldest and most populous city, with a bit over 336,000 residents as of the 2010 census. While traditionally a white middle-class suburban city, the demographics of Anaheim have changed in the past few decades. In 1980, the Latino population of Anaheim was a little under 15%. As of the 2010 census, it was at 52.8%, so a significant jump there. As of 2010 also, the foreign-born population of Anaheim was at around 37.2%. That's compared with 1980 when it was only at 13.3%. The resort industry is one of the biggest in Anaheim, with the Disney Corporation making up a lion's share. According to a 2013 financial report done by the city, Disneyland was the largest contributor of property tax to the city, as well as being the largest employer, making up 14% of the total city employment. Anaheim Disney is the second biggest amusement park in the world and generates hundreds of millions in tax revenue for local and state governments. While the resort district of Anaheim thrives, the city also has a significant problem with poverty. A report by the Public Policy Institute of California, a San Francisco-based think tank, stated that 39% of Anaheim's children live at or below the poverty line, many of them in Anaheim's Latino-majority neighborhoods. According to the study done by the Orange County Community Indicators report, a survey compiled using data from public and private organizations found that Anaheim and neighboring Stanton have the highest concentration of poverty-plagued neighborhoods in Orange County.
Anaheim recently changed from at-large city council elections to district elections. What does this mean?
Well, first, let's get some basics on the city government of Anaheim. Anaheim is a charter city, which means its laws are defined by a city charter, which works similar to a constitution for the city. The city has a council-manager format whereby a city council, which has legislative authority, is elected by city residents. The council then hires a city manager who oversees day-to-day operations. The mayor is elected by the entire city and is the presiding officer over the council. His role is first among equals, meaning that he has procedural authorities, but his vote is equal to that of other council members. The mayor and council members can serve for a max of 2 4-year terms. Originally, Anaheim City Council was elected in at-large elections. Basically, the entire city would vote on a pool of candidates, and the top 5 vote earners became members of the council. After a 2015 lawsuit brought by the Southern California chapter of the ACLU was won against the city, the council agreed to put district elections up for voter approval, and in 2014, voters overwhelmingly approved for districting. A committee of retired judges was assembled by the council in order to create the district map. This past November, the first election was held, done in accordance with this map. The lawsuit alleged that the practice of at-large elections disenfranchised Latino voters who were not as equally represented on the council as other areas of the city, such as the affluent Anaheim Hills. Before districting took effect, the mayor and 3 out of the 4 members of the council were residents of Anaheim Hills. One council member who was elected as a result of this new election process is Jose Moreno, who himself was a plaintiff in the ACLU lawsuit. Dr. Jose Moreno is an instructor at Cal State Long Beach and represents Anaheim's District 3, which has a Latino majority. Councilmember Moreno was a sponsor of the Sunshine Ordinance, which he created in order to curb the influence of Disney and other large-scale investors within the city. We'll be hearing from him later in the show.
So tell me about the Sunshine Ordinance.
Yeah, so the Sunshine Ordinance is a law recently passed by the city, and it basically places restrictions on lobbying the city of Anaheim. Lobbying is the process by which independent firms are hired to represent business interests and sway lawmakers. It's a ubiquitous aspect of government on all layers. Developers, corporations, and others will hire lobbyists to exert influence with lawmakers and get legislation passed that is favorable to them, or prevent legislation from being passed that is unfavorable to them. The new ordinance does the following things. It bars elected officials and employees from lobbying the city for 2 years after they leave their job. It prohibits the city from hiring people from lobbying firms. It requires lobbyists to register with the city and file quarterly reports. It requires city council members and executive level staff to retain all email communications for 90 days rather than the current 37 days. It calls for signs to be posted at the site of any large-scale development explaining the project. It defines a lobbyist as anyone who receives $500 or more a month to communicate with city officials for the purposes of influencing legislative or administrative actions. The ordinance passed 5-2.
Will there be direct effects felt by the council members as a result of this ordinance?
Yeah, so the law will directly affect sitting members of the council. Council members Chris Murray, Lucille Kring, and Stephen Fassel are all employ staff that are also employed by lobbying firms.
And what was the opposition like for this ordinance?
So this ordinance was opposed by 2 council members, and it reflects kind of a divide within the council. The 2 members were the ones that we previously mentioned, council members Chris Murray and Lucille Kring. Murray opposed the bill because she says that it didn't go far enough. She proposed amendments to the ordinance at the August 15th meeting when the ordinance was officially instituted. Her proposal was tabled by Mayor Tom Tate, which led to disruption as Murray accused Tate of being undemocratic, and Tate chided Murray for not following the rules. This is the latest in a series of flare-ups between Tate and Murray and Kring. Murray and Kring used to be part of the majority faction before districting happened, that often left Tate in the minority. Now with the addition of Moreno, Tate is in the majority. Following the November election, Tate and his cohorts began rolling back key legislations of the previous majority. This included ending a tax subsidy for luxury hotels, a contract with the Anaheim Chamber of Commerce. It fully ended the Anaheim streetcar project, and they fired an interim city attorney who was related to one of the deposed city council members.
So this law is about lessening the influence of Disney and other large-scale resort interests in Anaheim city government. Can you give us some examples of legislation passed by the city that was favorable to these corporate interests?
Well, as we'll discuss later with the councilman, the city council passed in July of 2016 a tax subsidy to four-star hotels built in Anaheim. The subsidy will rebate 70% of the bed tax normally paid by hotels. The bed tax is a 15% tax applied to stays in hotels. Disney shortly thereafter announced plans to build a 4-star hotel and applied for the subsidy. Disney's application states that the hotel will generate $14.7 million in bed tax revenue, 70% of which, or $10.3 million, will go back to Disney. This subsidy lasts for 20 years, meaning that Disney will receive a projected $200 million back from the city. This makes this the largest subsidy in the history of Orange County. Councilwoman Chris Murray and Lucille Kring, as well as Councilmember Jordan Brandman, voted in favor, while Councilmember James Vanderbilt was opposed. Mayor Tom Tate was also strongly opposed to the subsidy, but he left shortly before the vote. In 2015, the council passed a 45-year ban on the gate tax, a tax that is collected upon admission to the park. The ban is dependent on $1.5 billion in expansion by Disney over the course of those 45 years. While it is illegal for policies to be passed that strip voters of the ability to levy new taxes through referendum, this ban got around this by offering a rebate to Disney rather than by eliminating the tax outright. The vote to approve this deal was 3-2, with council members Chris Murray, Jordan Brandman, and Lucille Kring voting for the deal. Again, Mayor Tom Tate and Councilmember James Vanderbilt voted no. Both of these votes happened before districting. We'll be back right after this with an interview with Councilmember Jose Moreno of Anaheim's 3rd District. The show is LA State. The radio station is Golden Eagle Radio.
And we're back. The show is LA State. The station is Golden Eagle Radio. We're talking about an ordinance passed by the city of Anaheim recently, which offers new strict regulations of lobbying the city. The bill was proposed by Councilmember Jose Moreno, an instructor at Cal State Long Beach. Councilmember Moreno represents Anaheim's largely Latino 3rd District. Joe, you got a chance to speak with the council member. What did he tell you?
Yeah, so I asked the council member to tell us about the successful legal battle that led up to Anaheim's change from at-large elections to by-district elections for city council members. Here's what he had to say.
Sure. There were actually 3 plaintiffs in the lawsuit, myself, Amin David, and Consuelo Garcia. And we submitted a lawsuit and represented by the ACLU, but we were the plaintiffs, that basically alleged, and we felt very strongly given the data we had and the experiences we've had in the city, that the city's at-large election system largely disenfranchised the ability of the Latino electorate to influence local elections. The data that we examined and the experiences we've had were that under the at-large system, there's a racially polarized electorate. That is that folks tend to vote with names on a ballot or people on a ballot that they feel more familiar with, and that tends to be, in many ways, a racialized process. So Anglos see an Anglo name, they're more likely to vote for an Anglo name than a Hispanic surname. Asian Americans tend to vote for an Asian-sounding name than a non-Asian name. So so under that system, if the data suggests strongly that there's a racially polarized electorate, then California state law says that we can use the California Voting Rights Act as a tool to create a remedy so that all communities have influence in the outcomes of elections.
How do you think this has changed the political landscape of Anaheim?
It has. What's the word I want to use? It was tremendous, a tremendous change. The previous part of what disenfranchised not only Latino voters, but really disenfranchised most of the geography of Anaheim. It disenfranchised low-income voters, disenfranchised really all voters, because when we have such immense amount of money in our local elections, then it's very hard as a local candidate that is not tied to big corporate or special interests, that you cannot get the money to get your message out to the voters. We have over at that time we had over 125,000 registered voters in the city of Anaheim. Total population is 358,000. So it's a large city, and so to get your message out to voters requires a lot of money. It means mailers, brochures, of course staff, volunteers to get out there and knock on doors. So that kind of system really does disadvantage any local candidates who want to really run a grassroots-oriented campaign and not be tied to special interest money. So what we saw in this cycle with now district elections, instead of trying to reach 125,000 voters in my district, in District 3, we have 19,000 registered voters in a population of 52,000 or 54,000 people. So that meant that we did not need to depend on big money. We just needed enough money. We didn't need a lot. And with about $40,000, we were able to get 2 or 3 mailers out to local residents and voters. We had a strong volunteer base. We were able to knock on every door in our district. We were able to have multiple small coffee chats. So it was very localized. Our opponent, together, we estimate that there was over $600,000 to $700,000 spent supporting him, including from his own campaign committee, which had $200,000 in it. So we were getting mailers every day in our home, and so were residents. So over 30 plus mailers is where we were at, counting how many mailers he had in support of him. So what we showed is in a local by-district election, a local candidate with limited money but with really strong neighborhood bases can really challenge and be a viable candidate against big money.
Why did you propose the Sunshine Ordinance?
Yeah, well, part of it is in our push to shift our electoral system was in part out of our frustration that in an at-large system, it was very hard to get council members to pay attention to very local neighborhood issues, to citywide issues, because when you have big money that controls elections, then council members, assembly people, senate people, but really here at the local level, council people will tend to pay much more attention to what the folks who fund their campaigns want them to do. That doesn't make them bad people. It's part of a system. So if you want to successfully run for election or re-election, you have to cater to the interests that are funding you. So when I got into office through the by-district system, I quickly can realize that kind of system still existed, where you had lobbyists who have employees from their lobbying firms who are simultaneously working as council aides for our city council. We have a council person who has contracted with a public relations firm, that same firm, to staff her office, and that same firm also runs her campaigns for elected office. So that was just a clear to be conflict of interest, although legal. To me, it was certainly an ethical conflict, and certainly one that has practical implications. If a public relations firm, for example, is representing or lobbies for Disneyland, for subsidies that they receive, for tax exemptions they've received, and at the same time that same firm is staffing an actual council member inside City Hall, then that's a clear advantage to that company and a clear disadvantage to true representation for people. So who's representing people? It's supposed to be the council person, but her staff are the very same staff who staff Disney. So that prompted me to push the Sunshine Ordinance, that the people know who is lobbying our city, that we create a lobbying registry, that we forbid the practice or ban the practice of lobbying firms being allowed to have employees simultaneously working in City Hall, not only for council members, but also just within City Hall itself. And we also prohibited the ability of someone leaving council office or being an executive management person in the city or a director in the city, leaving the city and then going to work for a company that then comes back to lobby the city. So it's 2 years, a 2-year ban on the ability for someone to lobby the city on behalf of a project or a company that recently received or has benefited from a project that person was involved in.
From your perspective, which business interests have undue influence within the city government of Anaheim?
Oh, hands down, that would be Disneyland, the Walt Disney Corporation, I'll say. Hands down. The city council, just for as a recent example, they in June 2015, the city council out of nowhere came up with a policy that said anybody who builds a 4-star hotel in the city of Anaheim will get a 70% subsidy. That is, that the bed tax that we have in Anaheim, that is paid by tourists when they stay in a hotel here in Anaheim, 15% of the total bill would be a tax that would go into the general fund of Anaheim to fund services in the city. And the city council passed a policy, what they called an economic incentive policy, that said 70% of that tax revenue will go right back to the hotel developer of a 4-star hotel. That was passed in June 2015. Within a month, Disney submitted a proposal to build a 4-star hotel and got a 70% subsidy to build a $300 million 4-star hotel. That's not an accident, and it's not coincidence. The year prior, I believe, in 2014, in 2015, that same year, Disneyland also received a 45-year local tax exemption that was extended. They received a 20-year local tax exemption, what's called an entertainment tax exemption, in 1996. It sunset at 20 years, which means that if the city would decided for whatever reasons to implement a local tax of some sort, Disney would be exempt from that tax. And so that was sunsetting in 2016. So the city council extended that agreement for Disney to be locally tax exempt for 45 years. So it's very clear that Disney has an undue influence in our city, and I've asked anyone who may have knowledge, has there ever been a time that Disney has made a proposal to the city of Anaheim that has been denied? And no one seems to have any recollection of such an instance.
Many of our listeners and many outsiders worldwide know and love Anaheim because of Disneyland. What do you believe is the company's effect on the city and its citizenry?
So first and foremost, I think that's where I think my message gets convoluted, if not deliberately misconstrued, is I am absolutely supportive of our resort district. I am absolutely supportive of Disney, but I'm also very mindful that when you become dependent on one part of your economy, or if you become dependent on one company, then you become just that, dependent on their needs and their wants. And so they're able to then dictate the terms of what happens in a city. So what I think folks have misconstrued is that I'm absolutely supportive of helping our resort industry grow, helping them develop, but in a way that's balanced and that's responsible. So, for example, when we give Disney as a hotel developer, along with another corporate hotel developer, the Wincom Group, combined, they received over $550 million corporate tax giveaway to build their 3 luxury 4-star hotels. The question was never asked, where will the workers that will work in that hotel live? Anaheim has amongst the highest poverty rates in the county. About 90% of our children in our schools are on free and reduced lunch. Folks now know that we have this huge homeless population in Anaheim. There's over 4,000 children in the city of Anaheim in our schools that are labeled homeless in unstable housing. They live in garages, motels. So that's the other side of Anaheim that people do not see. And so I've just simply been asking the question very assertively, which is, while we do have a booming and strong economic engine in the resort, why is it that our poverty rates, since we began to really invest in the resort area, our poverty rates have gone from about 11% to now 17% in the city. And about 1 out of 4 children in Anaheim live in abject poverty. So those kind of questions are very uncomfortable for economic interest and economic development of a city, because what it means is it suggests that when you invest in becoming a service sector economy, which is what we've done, that means the wages do not keep up with housing, and so we have a gap. So Wages in the resort, I estimate, because no one will give me the official numbers, and even the city doesn't know the official numbers. But we estimate that the average wages in the resort area, based on the industry, are somewhere between $12 to $14 an hour. But the housing wage, the amount you need to earn in the city of Anaheim to rent a basic apartment, is $24 an hour. That's what's called a housing wage. So if our average wage is somewhere, let's say at the high end, $14 an hour, and it costs $24 an hour to rent an apartment, how do we fill that gap? How do we make sure people have the ability to access affordable housing? And the city does not have a formal affordable housing policy. In fact, through Disney's lobbying, about 12 years ago or so, the city formally zoned off the resort area that would not allow any affordable housing to be built. So in other words, we're encouraging the recruitment and the development of jobs that pay on the low end of the wage sector, and at the same time prohibit the development of affordable housing in the area where those workers actually work. And that's the undue influence that we see. So it's about bringing balance.
Councilmember Chris Murray attempted to make some amendments to the ordinance. She claimed it would have strengthened it. How do you feel about these amendments?
Well, I found it one curious that she wanted to make the strongest. We could just go by what she said. What she said, she believed that we should have the strongest sunshine ordinance in the county. If we're going to do it, let's do it right. She's been on council 6.5 years. She's never once proposed any kind of ordinance that would bring to light how the city negotiates, who negotiates to the city or lobbies the city, nor any restrictions on those lobbying efforts. So I found it curious that she would decide once a council member proposed it, and it's something that I've talked about as a resident, as a community commenter to the city council over the years. I've talked about a sunshine ordinance. So did a previous candidate to city council 5 years ago. Talked about it in his campaign about a sunshine ordinance. So the councilwoman had 6.5 years to propose something if she really believed in it, but she didn't. The councilwoman also accused myself and others from hiding this ordinance from the public and not disclosing it until the Friday before the agenda. But that's how ordinances are developed. You work with staff, and you can't work with more than 2 other council members because that's the Brown Act. It's a violation of the law. So you propose an ordinance, and it has a first read, and then that allows the public to read it, comment on it, and provide feedback. The council votes on it, and then it has a second read that really allows people to give more input. When the councilwoman introduced her amendment, she said it was to strengthen it, but she didn't reach out to me. I asked for this agenda item back in December, that this was an important thing for me to look at for the city. She did not reach out asking, hey, can I help you build a strong ordinance? So she waited until it was actually introduced and discussed on the first meeting that it was introduced to decide to offer her amendments. So that I think to me made it feel disingenuous. The other thing about the amendments that she proposed is I am looking at them. Some of them may make sense. Some of them may strengthen it. They also make the ordinance broader, and the more you broaden these kind of ordinances, the less impact they really have. So while they may look on paper stronger, they're much harder to enforce. So ours is very targeted. If you are a lobbyist and if you have direct business with the city, then you cannot have one of your employees working at the city simultaneously. If there is an agency that has a representative from the city of Anaheim that has a vote, then and you lobby that body on behalf of an agency, you have to register in the city of Anaheim as a lobbyist because you're lobbying de facto by default the city of Anaheim. So she's trying to broaden it to be any lobbyist in the county, and that's just really broad for me. The other part of her amendments are to not allow former campaign workers who are paid to serve on staff of the council aides of the council, which sounds good again at face value, but so I'm looking at that. We tabled her amendments because and I agreed with tabling because we had just passed an ordinance. It was approved, and I felt it really important. It's the first time in the history of the city we've done this. That it's really important for the public to understand what just happened and what are the rules, and for lobbyists to understand what are the rules. And let's let it sit and settle in for 60 to 90 days, and let's come back. Again, it's an ordinance. It could be amended. Unlike in previous things that they've done, previous councils, they do a contract of a subsidy. You can't come back to it. It's a signed contract. Ordinances you can come back and amend and strengthen. So I'm anxious to look at some of those amendments. But again, one of those amendments is around hiring former campaign people working to then work for you on council. That's a practice she currently has right now. She does that right now. She has her council staffing contracted out to a firm, Communications Lab, that also runs her campaigns. So if she feels that that's that important, that that's a questionable practice, she shouldn't wait for the ordinance to be approved the way that she would like it. She should stop the practice, right? You kind of you let your actions speak for you, not just simply trying to throw in amendments to an ordinance that is very unclear as to whether you really believe in what you're proposing to begin with. So I'm hoping that Councilman Murray will lead with action and not just...
We'll be back after these messages.
Alrighty, Mallory. Well, our time is up for today. We'll have to end it there. I'd like to cite the website Voice of OC, an investigative news outlet covering politics in Orange County. They do really great work, and their coverage of Anaheim City Council helped greatly with the researching of this story. You can visit them at voiceofoc.org. Thanks to our engineer, Josiah Bell. Great work.
This episode was written by Joseph Brizolara with assistance from Diego Barrera. It was produced by Joe Brizolara. Music by Doug Van Rennen and Ryan Sutera. I'm Mallory Wilkins. Thanks for listening. We'll catch you next time.
This is LA State, real media for real students. You're listening to Golden Eagle Radio.